Final panel of the day here on the Broadcast Pro Middle East Summit here in the Kingdom. And it's about podcasts. And I am really fascinated to get stuck into this. So I'm just going to introduce the panel, who are the best team of the day. What would you call us? The Real Madrids? Eh? Are we the Real Madrid?
Tottenham Hotspur, Joe.
Oh, wait. For the purposes of transparency, I think we should just go along the panel and say who you support. So, Tottenham Hotspur.
Only because I have an Australian coach. So.
We pray for you, Alex. Haram. Ahmed?
Liverpool.
Mashallah.
We have this discussion before.
For Mo Salah, of course, and Zaina.
I don't know anything about soccer.
Pick a team.
Football or soccer.
We've been talking a lot about football today, so pick a team. We're going to try and make this a little bit informal, but yes, it is about podcasts. And I think probably the best place to start after I introduce you is about determining exactly what a podcast is. But we have Alex Agashev from NBC Loud, the boss man. Can I say that?
You can say the boss man, sure.
Yeah.
The head man.
Yeah.
Content director.
Zaina Tabara. Zaina, just explain what you do.
I'm head of podcasts. Hello? Yeah. I'm head of podcasts at Al-Sharq and Al-Sharq Bloomberg. So we produce in-house content, so original IP. We also do white label content, and we also work with brands in the region to do branded content. Yeah.
Thank you, Zaina. And Ahmed Rafat from Takween.
Yeah, I'm Ahmed Rafat. I am the general manager of Takween. We have been in the media market since 2012. We're very specialized in content distribution, specifically in music and entertainment part.
Thank you, Ahmed. Right, feel free, by the way, to jump in on the conversation if you've got a point to add. I think I should just start with the basics. What is a podcast? What do you see a podcast is? Because the thing is, Alex, there seems to be a lot of confusion. Is it audio only? Is it audio and video? Is it video only? What platforms? So let's begin at the beginning.
Yeah, look, a podcast is essentially an opportunity to really tell a story, and I think... podcasters have to be good storytellers, have to be informative, and it's essentially long-form content that sits on multiple platforms. I think these days, podcasts have moved more into video podcasts as well, or vodcasts. And I think, it's important to make sure that you're maximising your content across multiple platforms, not just the audio space, but the video space. And for someone like me, who's the head of a radio station, which is the first English commercial station in KSA, NBC Loud FM, it can also translate into a radio show.
Right, and what about your perspective, Zaina? How do you see the podcast landscape?
I'll talk about Saudi and the Middle East. So it's interesting to see that, podcasts did start out as audio only, but over the past couple of years, video is a super important aspect of it. And of course, TikTok is the major I consider it like the discovery tool of podcasts now and distribution. But what's interesting in Saudi especially is that I call it the first wave of podcasters were audio only. So I just want to step back. So what's exciting about Saudi is that the podcast landscape is a creator-led landscape. It's all independent creators or independent new media companies compared to if you see the top podcast charts in the UK and the US, it's a mix of established, legacy brands and new podcasters. But in the region, and especially Saudi, it's all creator-led. You don't see a lot of the big behemoth media or legacy brands that have top podcasts. It's coming. It's starting out this year. So this is why I think Saudi is very exciting in that aspect, because it is creator-led. And yes, video is an important aspect. But I also want to, because I got that asked a lot today. They're like, is it video? Is it audio? I'm like, look, it depends.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, and it depends. Look, it depends on what content you're doing. So I was giving people an example that what's great about Saudi is that there's a thirst for knowledge content. So you have a lot of the top podcasts that are just audio only. no video, you don't know who the hosts are, and they do really well. Of course, video adds a certain aspect if it's like a conversational show, it's with a well-known person. But what I tell people that there's still such a big space for audio only, and if you want video as well. So it is content. So I know it started as podcast, but it is now more low cost to produce, low cost to distribute. You can experiment. So that's some benefits as well.
And what is it to you, Ahmed? Is it audio only? How do you see it? Is it audio only? Is it audio and video led?
I think they are both. They are audio and video. Mainly it's based on the audience behavior or audience requirements, especially for the new generations. Most of the new generation are seeking for a visual content, which I believe this is the main reason why podcasts started to have visual content, so that they get more attention from the audience. They are creating content for them. I know that podcast is originally an audio content, of course, and the main reason for it that I can consume the content whenever I need, even if I'm in driving, traveling, making my workouts, something like this. But still, we cannot ignore the behavior of the new generations, that they are seeking to have a kind of visual content so that they can feel they are interacting with the podcasters or whomever delivering the content to them, which I believe this is the main reason that is differentiating between the content that has been created by a human and AI.
Do you think there needs to be, and I'll come to you first on this, Alex, do you think there needs to be a sea change in the mentality for legacy brands? Zaina touched on it before, legacy media brands, because podcasts really was hit by the individual content creators first. They jumped on the bandwagon first, didn't they? Do you think there needs to be a sea change in strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. As we've already talked about, there needs to be a focus on multi-platform content. I think if you're not doing that, if you're not focusing on scale, then you're going to be left behind. I'm lucky to work for a big media company, like NBC Group, and we have multiple platforms. We have, audio platforms in the NBC Podcast and NBC Mood. We have Shahid, which is the biggest streaming platform in the Middle East, in the MENA region. We have radio stations as well, and we have social media platforms. So we have an opportunity.
So you think about all those outlets when
Absolutely.
you're creating podcast content?
I think we have to, and I guess we'll talk about monetizing content a little bit later, but it's critical, I think, if you're thinking about creating content, you have to start, to simplify the process. You need to think about, creating a video podcast that can translate into the audio, that can translate into the radio. We've already spoken about this today. Social media, for us, it's Shahid. It needs to be able to sit everywhere, the same content, and that's a big focus for us, because if we're not doing that, we're not getting the scale, we're not getting the numbers. And that's one of the biggest challenges in this region. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest countries, as we know, in the GCC, 36 million people, so we have much more scale, there's a bigger population size. But the country I worked in previously, the UAE, there's only 8 million people, so there's not as much opportunity for scale with just audio content on its own. So for me, working at NBC, we have a great opportunity for us to really maximize the content so it sits on multiple platforms, and it gives us a better opportunity to monetize it as well.
I mean, I've asked Alex there, Zaina, about legacy media houses and brands adopting it. What about people like myself? What about journalists? What about celebrities? Z-list celebrity I am, by the way. What about celebrities? What about media personalities? Do they have to rethink their strategy with regards to podcasts?
Yeah, I think a lot of journalists, whether that's even print journalists,
Print journalists as well.
Print journalists should have their own podcast. And I always, I don't want to reference a lot of Western brands, but I think a great case study is New York Times. So they're a legacy brand, and they made a great pivot into digital. So besides their subscription model, they started going heavy into podcasts. So they have audio only podcasts, and that's a lot of their journalists, print journalists, who started going behind the mic. So what I give a lot of advice to so I've been getting a lot of legacy journalists in the Middle East and TV presenters, and they're trying to make that shift because they are seeing that rise of TikTok content. People want more, honest discussions, easygoing, not as manicured. And I tell them that, they have to pivot. They have to build their personal brand around podcasts. So in the States, if you see, some of the top podcasters are like Megyn Kelly or Piers Morgan or Tucker Carlson, and they have, they were able to pivot and do their own standalone content. And I think this is really important. And in the region, like I said, the ones who are kind of who have cornered that are the independent creators. In Saudi, there's like Thamania, there's Mike's. They're doing great. And I think it's because it's all about communities. So you have to, but we're at an age, and, with Gen Z and, Gen Alpha, they're looking for communities. So if they want financial literacy, they will, go to that person, or sports, or any domain.
Is it a struggle to convince those journalists that you're referring to?
I think it's a struggle because people want to have full control of how they look and what they say. I think a lot of the journalists or media people here.
And the trend is not to be polished.
Yeah, and they see they see the TikTokers, they see all that, and they have to have. It's okay to have, it's going to be conversational. You can have solo podcasts. It doesn't have to be, every time a guest. So, and I tell people, whoever's the first mover, it's the space is open. There's still I tell people that there's so many categories in the Middle East that still haven't been touched. We have a lack of female podcasters in most of the categories. That hasn't been filled. We have in finance. We still need content around that, especially in Saudi and the Middle East. There's a need for financial literacy, and podcasts are a great way to do that. So it's still a big space. Whether it's traditional journalists or TV journalists, they should take advantage of. This is the time to rebuild their personal brand through podcasts.
Ahmed, I know your background is music, isn't it? Have you faced the same kind of challenge in convincing your musical cohorts to get involved and get on board and get on the train, jump on the train with regards to podcasts?
Yeah, of course.
The artists.
Yeah, of course. Especially the legendary artists that they used to distribute and publish their content in a different ways, and when they have been transformed to the digital mediums, they didn't used to deal with such a kind of challenges and such a kind of new technologies when it comes to the music industry, which I think at podcast it's going to be more challenging, since the podcast itself is supposed to come from someone that have a different expertise about something that he would love to share it with audience. So normally there is a big gap or a big difference in culture between the one who's going to give the info and the one who's going to receive it, which is, as Zaina said, that the new generation, especially the generation Z and Alpha, one of the major challenges for them that to get their attention to the content is a kind of a very challenging stuff, which we always trying to help podcasters by applying a kind of audience development like making hooks about the content, having different or multi formats for their podcasts so that they can get attention for audience to start listening or seeing whatever they are saying on their podcasts. But of course, for a strict answer for your question, there is a challenges, and I believe podcasts have more challenges than what happened in music, especially when it comes to monetization.
We'll talk about monetization in just a second, but before moving on to that, I want to ask you and Zaina in particular, with regards to the podcast, I understand chemistry, I understand on-air chemistry, I understand how to format shows, I don't understand how to play the algorithm game. How much of podcasting, and I'll come to you first, Zaina, how much of podcasting is playing the algorithm game?
I think it's a mix. I think actually with podcasts, it's good content. I don't think it's, it doesn't play to the algorithm. I'll tell you, most of the podcasts that we've produced, I'll give you an example. We have a book podcast. She summarizes the best business books into Arabic, like The Good to Great, all that. We didn't like try to outsmart the algorithm, but it's
You didn't juice it.
we
so
didn't
to
juice
speak.
it, but I just think it's with podcasts, it's actually about the content, and it's about, again, it's a 50% content, 50% how distribution. Like I said, TikTok is a major player. Having partnerships with distribution companies, so Apple, Spotify, and Rami, that's very
Does that
important.
play in the game?
Yes, that does help
Right.
when you build relationship, because the major problem with podcasts is discoverability. This is kind of the major issue, and I think with AI, it's really hard to curate content with AI with podcasts. So in Apple, what's great, they have per country, they curate the homepage. So it's actually their own curators who curate the homepage. So they kind of try to discover what's new, and that helps a lot. So that's it.
Have we moved away, Ahmed, from a single content creator to now it's a team of people like yourself? Are you finding you're being approached, you and your team and your company are being approached more and more by people who, look, I need the whole thing, I need the whole setup, I need the whole team?
Yeah, of course, some of them have been reached us, but I think the main reason that they are seeing how podcast is going viral, being consumed in exponential ways. And until the moment, to be honest, the culture of the podcast itself is not quietly spreaded in the market. I believe that you already have a discussion with me that you already have a kind of good relationships with multiple football players, but I don't know from where I can start. How can I start pitching my content, scripting my podcast to be getting more attention and more audience? And this is when it comes to the content development itself, away from the technical stuff and the setup.
And the algorithm game.
Yeah, and I see that you are amused about the algorithm, but I think every platform has its own algorithm.
Well, it's a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
When everyone talks about playing the algorithm, but what is it's a mystery. No one except those companies knows what that is.
Yeah, that's why I'm telling you. For every platform, they have their own algorithm. What they are seeking for, how can they getting this content on the top level, like on the music, they are creating a playlist, which I think is the same on Spotify and Apple, for example. They are creating a couple of playlists that they are pitching to their audience. This is one of the way that the algorithm is working, which is completely different when it comes to visual platforms like YouTube, for example. And which I think that's why visual podcast has been demanding when those platforms like YouTube has been coming to the game, and they want to I can say that they are dealing with the content as if it's normal video content. So the algorithm on this platform is going to completely be different on the other audio platforms.
Okay, let's talk about the money. Monetization. Alex, how do you monetize podcasts? It seems a very fragmented landscape to me, but that's just someone from the outside looking in.
Yeah, just quickly on that topic of the algorithm. Something to quickly mention, I used to work with a very high-profile presenter at a previous station, a really, really good content creator, actually, and he was so obsessed with the algorithm, whether it was Instagram, whether it was the podcast, and I'd say, look, this content is just too long. It's 15, 20 minutes. What are you doing? I'd say to him. He's like, but what about the algorithm? But at the end of the day, it's all about the content. You know, it's all about great storytelling. It really is. You know, and I've seen it time and time again at the various media networks I've worked at, radio stations, you know, audio, platforms that we've sort of created at networks I've worked at. You've just got to be a great storyteller. A great content creator, you know, find a great co-host. The chemistry is still important, you know. All the things that we learned when we were, you know, starting in radio all those years ago are still relevant for podcasts as well. And we were chatting about this before, you know, I think radio hosts can translate really well into podcast hosts.
Why exactly?
Because radio hosts are trained to engage with an audience, you know, one-on-one. And that one-on-one connection with your listener with the person who's, listening to your podcast is absolutely critical, to be able to connect with them from an emotional perspective, the emotional connection, And if you're able to do that successfully, whether it's, radio, audio, you can be very, very successful. Podcasts, on the other hand, podcasters who've never worked in radio before can struggle to go the other way.
You don't think it works?
It can work, but anyone can do a podcast.
So what about
not anyone can do a radio show.
So what if you add the visual element to it? That radio, obviously, we wouldn't have the visual conversation 10, 20 years ago because there was no YouTube 20 years ago. I've been told I have a face for radio. So what if that radio personality doesn't translate visually in terms of...
you have to be able to do it these days, absolutely. So you have to engage, from a camera perspective. If you're not able to do that, you're not going to survive too long in this industry these days. But you look fine, Joe.
It's over.
You look fine. But to your question around monetization, and it all sort of comes back to storytelling, to great content. If you have the content, eventually you're going to be able to monetize it. I've always believed in that, whether it's radio or audio. But as I mentioned before, in terms of monetization, podcasts on their own from an audio platform perspective, it's challenging in these markets because of scale. Scale is a really important part of trying to grow your content. And as I mentioned before, for us, particularly NBC Group, we've got the multiple platforms, and that's really important for us to be able to think, how can we maximize this content in the best possible way? And that's going to help us monetize it.
I want to actually come back to you on this, Alex, because you are a media house. But Zeina, before that, we're seeing springing up a number of podcast speciality media houses. I'm thinking off the top of my head, the production company that Gary Lineker, for example, the
Goalhanger. I love the story of Goalhanger.
And they now have an entire suite of podcasts under their umbrella. Is that the way it's going?
Yeah, I think what's exciting, by the way, Goalhanger is a great case study. I always share that with people. I'm like, it's Gary Lineker, the footballer or soccer player. Sorry, I got confused. Football. Yeah, so I tell them like he has he's a footballer who created the podcast network. I listen to all his podcasts, like all the shows. So I think what we're seeing now in the region is we're seeing podcast networks 2.0. So a couple of years ago, we saw a whole bunch of podcast networks when podcasts started. Some of them survived, some of them didn't. But now we're kind of seeing it 2.0. So we are seeing new podcast networks, which is exciting because I think the first round of podcast networks in the region were trying too hard to, be very polished, took time to produce shows. We're seeing the next batch of networks now moving fast. It's easier to produce.
Can I just jump in there, because the Overlap, which is it's another football podcast, and it's very polished. It's a studio production. It works.
Yeah. You can have it depends, like I said, you can have the polished look, but the majority is, in terms of getting content made, I tell, it should be, don't overthink it, just raw, move fast. And by the way, when I mean it could be as simple as a studio and mics. But so we are seeing a bunch of networks, but again, the big space, I'll just share it out there. So, for example, in Saudi, the big space now are podcast studios. So this is, there aren't podcast studios that you can, to rent out as easily. So
anyone want to start a podcast studio in
So
Riyadh?
This is a big white space in Saudi because a lot of people I get contacted with all the time. People are like, we want to shoot podcasts in Saudi, because a lot of them are still traditional, say, video content studios that they'll fix themselves up to be a podcast, but people are looking for a one-stop shop. So this is a big opportunity and white space in Saudi right now. Just one-stop shop for podcasts. Yeah.
And Ahmed, coming back on topic to the monetization aspect, where do you see the monetization element of podcasting going? Where are the opportunities in particular? How do you monetize?
There is multiple ways that you can monetize your podcast. Of course, from my personal perspective, I can still see that it doesn't take what it deserves. But normally, this is what happens when something new has been innovated. We have seen this since we started digital distribution for the music and for the entertainment content, which I believe podcast is also part of the entertainment content. But I see that it's coming from the point that other content type has been ended with, like the subscription model, which is the major monetization way for musical content. I see it's very important for podcasts because users are willing to pay for a storytelling, for an info or a knowledge that they are keen to know about it, which is not the way like when you distribute a comedian content as an entertainment, like distributing like musical content. They are willing to listen it, but they don't have the focus or the intention to pay for it, since it's not a kind of major valuable information, which is completely different on a podcast. So I see it's a huge opportunity for podcasters to make money. Maybe they are not making what they are deserving at that time, which is, yeah, of course.
I don't know how much longer we've got, Vijay, but we're almost there. Oh, there it is. I've just seen the clock, by the way. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. We're always coming to the end then. I just want to ask you, and this is a very pertinent question for you in particular, Alex, because media houses, they have a brand, a trusted brand. They have a trusted legacy as well. Do you think that's going to play a pivotal part in the future with regards to podcasts, rather than just Joe Morrison in his bedroom with an iPhone on a stand?
Well, it's certainly an advantage, definitely. As I said, working for NBC Group, it has a heritage, it has a reputation. People trust our brand. We have multiple TV channels. Obviously, there's the streaming platform and Shahid radio stations, and we also partner with SSC, which you're a part of. So there's an opportunity for us to continue to collaborate, continue to grow our offerings, both in English and Arabic, and we need to just keep pushing, and we've also invested into podcast studios. This has already been talked about a moment ago. So we're going to be launching our new podcast studios very shortly.
Wow.
So yeah, it's going to be a real shift forward for us, particularly from a video podcast perspective. And at the end of the day, if you're not delivering exceptional content, it's got to look good, and it's also got to be really creative, and it's also got to be interesting in a variety of topics. We've got 100 titles at the moment, more than 100 titles in NBC Podcasts and NBC Mood, and we're pushing forward with Shahid as well. There's over 10 titles there now, and that's going to continue to grow through 2025. So, yeah, I think it's a case of you've just got to look for as many collabs as you possibly can. If you're not part of a big network like I am, then you've got to look for collaborations. A collaborative approach, I think, in this part of the world is really, really important. So if you're not doing that, you're going to struggle to monetize content.
And finally to you, Zaina, is there any opportunity for the little guy anymore? 10 years ago, anyone could start a YouTube channel and they would get quite good traction. Now it seems to be an industry, a juggernaut. Is there any hope for someone who's doing it on their own in their back bedroom, for example?
I actually think that's where the new talent is coming from. I actually don't think people want new voices. So like I said, the podcast industry in the Middle East, it's saturated, but actually a lot of the content or the top players are the same podcasts, the same shows, and there is a thirst for new people. And this is where I tell brands, I'm like, don't look, because a lot of brands they want to work with the top influencers, and I go, you know what? This is the time. It's you should reach out to micro knowledge influencers and work on podcasts with them. Start with them from something small, so they can grow with you if you want to do a podcast of some kind. Because a lot of brands are like, should I jump into doing our own podcast? Should I work with someone? So I think actually this is the time for knowledge influencers to work with bigger brands. It's a great time, whether you're small. I think it's a great time.
And I think the buzzword, Ahmed, to wrap all this up is authentic, isn't it? Someone who really believes in the topic and they're passionate about the topic that they're actually talking about on that podcast. You couldn't do a podcast on Manchester United, could you?
Actually, I don't have so much information and knowledge to share with people about football like you, for example. I'm just a normal fan that I'd love to see a good football match. But I think there is an opportunity for everyone to create his own podcast, to start sharing whatever he have with people he didn't even imagine that his voice is gonna be reached to them. And I believe from myself that everyone have a specific thing that other people that would love to know about it. So I believe the opportunity is still there, and everyone have the opportunity to develop and create his own podcasts. And one of the best things that you can even host other knowledgeable people to share their knowledge too, which is very big opportunity that you don't have just to have the information. Even having the connection, you can monetize your connection by creating a podcasts with people that audience love to know more about their life, their experiences, their story, and their practices in life.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying with us, and thank you to the panel. Alex Ashigev from NBC Loud FM, Zaina Tabara from Ashak, and Ahmed Rafat from Taween. A round of applause, please, for the panel.